And now I will give the floor to Marko Breshane. He got his PhD from the University of Pisa, and his last affiliation was to the University of Zagreb. He worked very much in socialism, anti-fascism, Italian intellectuals, and so on. And recently he joined the happy group of people working on the democratic space. And his paper today is dedicated to this area and with the title Country for Nationalists, State and Nation Building in the Post-Habsburg Interwar History. Please, Marko, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't have PowerPoint, so anyway I will speak standing, so I can speak louder maybe. And keep your attention even if we are going towards lunchtime. My attempt here now is to rethink a little bit the relationship between Italian nationalism and fascism in the post-Habsburg Istria in the interwar period, with special regard to the 20s. Several studies have considered the ascent of the upper Adriatic fascism as a radical expression of the Italian nationalism, and analyzed it in terms of the relationship between a national center and the periphery. They in particular internalized the idea of a border fascism, fascismo di confine, resonating the upper Adriatic fascist self-representation and interpreting fascism as the century of the Italian homeland, or as the vanguard of the Italian nation vis-à-vis the Slavic world. Nevertheless, the problem with the idea of the border fascism is that it tends to take for granted the geopolitical and cultural notion of national border. Indeed, the very sense and the extent of the boundary were contested in the post-war Upper Adriatic, and then they were in the making in the 20s and the 30s and onwards. Obviously, nationalist conflicts and nationalist movements did matter in the post-1918 turmoil, in the establishment of the Italian state after the annexation in 1920, and under the fascist government and then regime since 1922. What I am to argue here is that the nationally focused points of view cannot be the starting point for understanding the transitional dynamics as well as the processes of nation and state building in Istria. Instead, I will start from the unexpected reactions of the Italian nationalists and independentists, as well as the new authorities, to the first months of the occupation of the region between late 1918 and mid-1919. Their experiences did not fit at all with their narratives about the indisputable Italianness of the Upper Adriatic, as rooted in the Roman and Venetian past. At the same time, under the Habsburg rule, the Italian independentists had contended that the presence and the growth of the Slavic populations were related to the policies of the Habsburg Empire, understood as being exclusively anti-Italian. The collapse of the imperial institutions was thus expected to mark the very end of the multinational society and thus the disappearance of the Slavs. The persistence of the Slavic communities and the radicalization of their national competition in the aftermath of the Italian victory in 1918 came as a shock to the Italian nationalists. For instance, the writer and journalist Silvio Benco, in an article published in June 1920, dramatically realized, quote, "The nationalists in the Julian March are a few indeed." In Istria, as elsewhere in Europe in the aftermath of the Great War, the crisis brought to waves of social and political unrest, workers' strikes, peasants' uprisings, electoral and organizational ascent of the left parties and movements. The Slovenian and Croatian-speaking socialist members joined the Upper Adriatic section of the Italian Socialist Party, which constituted the former section of the Austrian Social Democratic Party. Of course, the political leaders and the official propaganda of the Socialist Party spoke the language of the internationalism, linking the local conflicts to the post-1917 progress of global revolution, whose model was the Russian and Bolshevik Revolution. Nevertheless, In the everyday experiences of the local actors in Istria, this language of global revolution converted into localized forms of disinterest, mistrust, disloyalty towards the new statist authorities, sometimes leading to spontaneous practices or organized strategies of rebellion. For a while, let's focus on the situation of Poland, which went through a deep crisis after the collapse of the empire and the decline of its role as a major military port. In April 1920, a general strike was proclaimed and lasted for almost 1 month. A police report explained, quote, "At first glance, this strike may apparently express solidarity with the workers of the kingdom. However, in Poland, it takes usual political and anti-national shape because of the plot of some well-known leaders who have all the interest to prove at every chance their strength to the detriment of our prestige." End of quote. According to the authorities, two were the main reasons for the anti-national feature of this strike. Firstly, the port workforce of Poland immediately took part in the unrest, although it was not directly interested in the question raised by the workers of the kingdom, being this arsenal ruled by laws different from those of the kingdom. Secondly, the mass of the Slavic peasants living in the outskirts of the town gave this unrest a considerable strength of resistance by sending everyday contributions in money and in products to the trade union center. End of quote. The second point was considered with particular concern by the authorities as a proof of growing unrest of this mass of people who had not given any sign of organization at that point. As the post-1918 everyday experiences mismatched the nationalistic narratives, the Italian state authorities were forced to reject the external outlook of the events and to resort to conspiratorial theories. Moreover, by stressing the specificity of the national question in the Patriotic, the Italian state authorities and nationalist forces underrated the common denominator with the social political conflicts taking part everywhere in the Italian peninsula in 1919-1920, concerning the autonomous bargaining power of the working class and peasant movement. At the same time, by referring to the Slavic peasants, this nationalistic view stressed the cultural roots of the unrest over the social ones, pushing for the national identification of their enemies and providing fuel for an escalation of conflicts similar to others in post-Habsburg Europe. In this context, the Patriotic was the first site of the active organization of the fascist squares. In this region, the Italian fascism has been traditionally seen as the product of heated nationalist conflicts and notably the proof of the strength of the Italian nationalism. Nevertheless, an interesting article on the origins of fascism in Istria, published by the fascist journalist and militant Gino D'Angelo in June 1922, tends to challenge this view. D'Angelo particularly acknowledged, quote, "The villages have been, so to speak, cleansed, and many people have thus changed their mind. Faint and hesitant people gradually approached, observed, understood. And in multilingual zones, alien people, allogeni in Italian, exclusively by way of fascism, have retrieved contact with the local Italians. During the spiritual revolution, it occurred that among alien people, especially among the young people, someone spontaneously and enthusiastically asked to be involved in the fascist movement." End of quote. Interestingly, a high number of those who the fascists called the alien people, Slavic people, or Croats and Slovenes was enrolled in the fascist movement and was pushed to support the fascist regime. More interestingly, even when they were enrolled, fascists kept on labeling them as Slavic, Slovenian, or Croatian fascists. On the other hand, in a fine analysis of the Eastern fascism published on the former socialist and communist newspaper Il Lavoratore, the communist militant and journalist Mario Besset denounced, quote, "Fascism proclaims itself defender of the patriotic ideals and guarantee of the Italian workers in the name of the superior interest of the nation. The fascist circles in Julian March allied themselves with the Slavic nationalist and irredentist bourgeoisie in order to fight the workers from the Julian March and to destroy the class organizations. End of quote. The small gangs of fascists inspired by radical nationalism became a powerful driving force for nationalization through ideological and social mobilization. In spite of its violent nationalism, fascism appealed also to not yet nationalized people willing to a kind of a revolutionary or violent change, even a generational change, or to people willing to switch their national belonging. On the one hand, the activists who took part in the fascist movement, even though they were supposed to belong to other national communities different from the Italian one, were asked to ignore their alleged own nation's code, and were told to prioritize other tasks, such as the struggle against the socialist and communist movement, the generational change, the search for an anti-Slavic imperial order. On the other hand, by repressing and eradicating the socialist movement, fascism became an agent of violent destruction of the Habsburg multinationalism and of the national indifference before and even more than driving force of the Italian nation building. Between 1925 and 1937, in coincidence with the full building of Mussolini's dictatorship, special laws were implemented in order to close the Slovenian and Croatian schools, to impose the transformation of the names of places, of the surnames into Italian, to forbid the use of Slavic languages in the public realm. In that context, the upper-patriotic fascists believed to solve the problems raised by the limits of the national building through the imposition of and identification with the loyalty to the state authority and to Mussolini's regime. Nevertheless, the fascist regime promoted not only the Italian nationalization of the borderland, but through its real or threatened violent pressure, created also the preconditions for processes of counter-nationalization, Slovenization and Croatization. An interesting example comes from a report of the police officials of Pisino, composed in April 1925. Quote, if we venture into the countryside for a while, we will see that the willingness to peacefully adapt existing until some time ago among those populations does not exist anymore. The Slavic big bosses, the priests, the teachers, and all the agitators in general exploited the popular discontent stemming from the economic disease and exploited the sense of reaction which is naturally determined by the introduction of the new Italian laws, not always out to their mood and their mentality. On the one hand, it is possible to observe that the part of the population remains indifferent to these plots and follows calm and trustful its fate forever tied to Italy. On the other hand, it is possible to notice how a new spirit of intolerance is rising against us and an open spirit of revenge spreads day by day in the countryside and abroad. While admitting the ongoing process of counter-nationalization by segments of the eastern countryside, fascist authorities thus alluded to some forms of indifference which were particularly welcome. As a matter of fact, the fascist regime was willing to take up the challenge of mass nationalization in Istria. However, differently from the nationalists, in face of multiple difficulties and resistances, fascists were also ready to build on forms of indifference to nation, even to politics as such, and to reshape them into their dynamic political project of dictatorial power. They believed that the annexation of these upper Adriatic lands represented the very beginning of the national battle, rather than be its triumphant outcome, and played it out in the small villages of Istria. Additionally, the nationally based interpretation of fascism did not entirely match the reality of a movement and then of a regime characterized by violent internal struggles before and after it seized the power. For instance, I will focus on a quite interesting episode of struggle within the fascist circle, Fascio di Combattimento of Pinguete, now Buzet, in 1927-1928. A quite ambitious local fascist named Antonio Pucchiara was the promoter of the Veterans Association of Pinguete. In 1924, the head of the Royal police office of Capodistria asked the head of the royal police office of the province of Istria in Poland to expel Cucchiara from the town of Pinguente because her wife was a fanatical Croat. And his son-in-law was Francesco Giuseppe Flego, elected to the Italian parliament in 1919 and defined as the most enraged Croat from Pinguente. In November 1926, Cucchiara became the main organizer of the Farmers' Union, fascist union, including most of the local Croatian peasants, and he used his special relation with them in order to strengthen his position within the local fascist group. A report of the police office in Capodistria explained, quote, maybe in good faith, anyway under the influence of these alien relatives, especially his wife, they meant, he became an advocate of the Croatian element in Pinguente, who in turn used him to fight the small group of Italians of that village, especially at the time of the political and administrative elections. When accused of having provoked the crisis of the local administration of Pinguente, Cucchiara said, quote, it is painful to observe that our fascist work has to find its harshest enemies among the Italians and the fascists, whereas it mobilized large consensus among the alien people, allogeny in Italian. End of quote. At this point, the Istrian organization of the fascist unions intervened in order to neutralize the conflict by making a more general argument, a quite amazing argument from a fascist source indeed. Quote, in the pre-war period, a Slavic danger might be real in Istria, as Austria had all the interest to denationalize the discredited Italian populations in order to prevent the spread of the irredentist movement in Julian March, which had in turn some deep backlashes in the near kingdom of Italy. However, we can't see or even conceive today how it is possible to take over municipalities by a small alien minority, which can be quite easily assimilated because it is resident in the national territory. End of quote. Given this general assessment, providing a quite direct linkage between territorial sovereignty, state loyalty, and cultural assimilation, the eastern section of the fascist unions then focused on the case of Pinguente, still quoted. As a matter of fact, the hypothetical or supposed rulers would be no more and no less than Italian citizens having rights and duties as equal as all the others who have ruled until today the public realm, with criteria less than fascist, always keeping a deep abyss and an unjustified attachment with the countryside due to false prejudices or to narrow mentalities of men at this point overcome by the events. End of quote. What is most interesting and paradoxical here is that this fascist discourse was not based on an open and aggressive rejection of the liberal rhetorics, but was shaped on a subtle but substantial alteration and even reversal of the liberal language of duties and rights. The fascist discourse intertwined citizenship and production, and the claims of the former were intermingled with the needs of the latter. According to this document of the fascist unions, forbidding the voluntary membership to the fascist unions meant not only, quote, to perpetuate the hatred between two races who inevitably must live together, but above all, to obstruct the practical implementation of fascism in the field of production. A different point of view, a much more pessimistic one, was present within the most extreme currents of the fascist party. Mistrusting the policies of assimilation, strategies of political cleansing, perspectives of colonization of Istria by Italian group of colonizers coming from other regions intertwined into the most radical fascist positions. For instance, a report of the National Confederation of the Fascist Unions in 1932 argued that the problem of the political cleansing in the rural zones of alien people may represent the most dominant one among the political problems of Istria, but maybe for reasons of foreign policy, it had not been solved yet. According to this vision, the rural population of Istria, with notable exceptions, could never convert into the Italian feelings. Neither the expulsion of the Slovenian and Croatian teachers, nor the removal of the clergy would solve the problem of the Italianization of the eastern population. To conclude, in the 20s and 30s, the everyday experiences of the Italian and fascist authorities tended to deconstruct the nationalist, even the racial categories in Istria, at the same time when they were using them in order to legitimize their claims and their actions. Observed through local lens, the very definition of majority and minorities was a process in the making in this post-Habsburg region as elsewhere. Indifference to the Italian nation, indifference to the Italian law, indifference to fascism or politics as such, pointed out different aspects of the complex relationship between state and civil society in interwar Istria. Indifference was often ready to transform itself into hostility towards the fascist regime, of course. Anyway, it revealed how many obstacles and resistances the Italian state and nation building met in this period in the region. Fascism provided radical but paradoxical answers to these difficulties. We have seen two basically different attitudes towards Slavic populations, even though these attitudes tended to overlap and intermingle each other within the fascist movement and regime. On the one hand, the push towards assimilation based on the assumption that the Slavic populations could be nationalized, Italianized. In this optimistic perspective, state building and nation building tended to interact each other, even though they never identified each other. On the other hand, the idea that the Slavic populations understood as a race could not be nationalized, as they were intrinsically different from the Italian race. This fascist form of cultural pessimism completely disconnected nation building from state building and fueled the search for more radical political solutions, which were tightly connected with the imperial project of Mussolini's regime. In this sense, the post-Adriatic region in the interwar period was the laboratory of a new fascist